A lot of people are well familiar with Cyanide Studios' stealth game series Styx. However, before the French studio's Nicky Goblin became well known and beloved, he was the deuteragonist of a much less known, much less successful game, of Orcs and Men. Released in 2012 for PC, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, the game is a fantasy RPG that follows the story of Archael, an elite orc soldier tasked with the secret mission of assassinating the Emperor of Mankind, who is responsible for the persecution, slaughtering, and enslavement of orcs and goblins. As you can guess, nothing screams secret like a massive unit bursting through a door with an axe in hand. So to ensure that the mission indeed remains a secret, he is accompanied by Styx, the only goblin known to demonstrate intelligence, and receives aid from humans discontent with the Emperor's regime. Although at a first glance this might look like your usual real-time action RPG, of Orcs and Men is in fact a turn-based RPG in disguise. While you have the freedom to move your character around the map, even during combat, every action is taken in turns, with the player having to pick a target for each action and being able to queue up to 5 of them. Because of this, the tutorial of this game is probably one of its biggest filters. The expectation going into this game for most people would probably be that the gameplay would be similar to that of an hack and slash game, as it would complement the mentality of me green, me big, me smash. Nothing fits better the fantasy of being a very angry orc than aggressively staring at your enemies, choosing every action that you're going to take with rage. Archael's moves depend on which stance he's using. Much like the warrior in WoW, he has an aggressive and a defensive stance, which similarly buffs his attack stats and resistance stats respectively. However, the catch is that in aggressive stance, while Archael deals more damage, he also builds a lot of rage. When the rage gauge is filled up, it causes him to enter a berserker state in which you are unable to choose any moves or targets, making it so he takes increased damage and can even attack Styx. And differently from most games that have a berserker state, there is no benefit for going berserk, as all it does is making Archael extremely vulnerable. This is the game's way to force the player to go into defensive stance. This stance is all about taking less damage, reducing rage generated, spending rage, and crowd control abilities. So despite your best wishes to play as a berserker orc, you soon will find out that you're pretty much heavily forced to play Archael as a tank for Styx. Styx can choose between a melee and a ranged stance, and to be honest, as long as Archael taunts the enemies and keeps them locked down,
Ram Ranch is under siege, under lockdown. These shoe greenskins are gonna fuck Ram Ranch humans in the butt.
choosing between each of them is not as crucial as it is with Archael. Ideally, you will swap them out accordingly to what you need, as the range stance has more crowd control options and melee has access to a healing spell. But regardless, Styx is not as punished as Archael for choosing one stance over another. Both characters have a third stance that starts out as a team-based stance that allows Archael to throw Styx on targets, or for Styx to throw Archael a potion that increases his health regeneration. But later this becomes the mastery stance, the stance with the most powerful abilities that is only accessible after completing a quest very close to the end of the game. Outside of combat, Styx can enter a stealth stance that allows him to move undetected by enemies as long as he doesn't come too close, and in it he can instantly kill one enemy at a time. This is obviously where the idea for the Styx series came from, and although stealth is optional, you will quickly find out that not really. Taking out as many enemies as possible without being detected as Styx severely reduces the difficulty of the engagements. So, do you want to play an angry orc on a warpath? Too bad, because you're forced to carefully and meticulously choose every action. Otherwise, you're going to be forced to reload the latest save. It's easy to get overwhelmed by a pack of enemies, so again, upsetting the expectation that you might have of Orcs and Men wants players to approach combat carefully. It takes a while to get used to it, but when you do, the combat is not that bad. As you play the game, it becomes quite clear that Of Orcs and Men wasn't a particularly polished game. The first most obvious, practically unmissable sign are the animations that are very stiff. I understand that the average orc here can barely wipe it by themselves with a build like that, but come on, the guy walks like he crapped his pants. The second is how often NPCs and even the player characters can get stuck in pathing bugs. Remember when I said you can queue up actions? Well, yeah, you also can't cancel any of the actions you choose to take. For most of the game, that really isn't much of a problem, besides getting your character stuck like buffoons attacking the wrong guy. But if you ever face ranged opponents, firing from high grounds and you accidentally try to use a melee attack on them, you might as well just back it up. Buried underneath the discouraging combat is a pretty good story. The premise of the orcs being a race heavily persecuted by men, with orcs being enslaved, is very reminiscent of Troll's story in Warcraft, and it's a good example of a good monster kind of story. While it does have a few good twists and turns.
So you're the Butcher of Bay Harbor.
It really doesn't deviate much from what you might expect. And some segments have choices that, spoilers, they don't really matter at all, unless they are related to starting a quest. Overall, the story is simple but still solid enough to be worth uncovering. The game does a decent job at creating a non-black and white world, with not all humans or orcs being good or bad, but it is also inconsistent in developing some of its side characters. It honestly feels jarring that a character that was pretty much a Hulk joke has a tragic, well-developed background story of humans killing his family, while the great mage that is supposed to help saving us from the oppression of humans barely gets a story and is frankly quite forgettable. Even the bragging orc called Braggart was more memorable than her. I even remember his name! The presentation of Orcs and Men has its ups and downs. The UI is okay and fairly clean for an RPG of that time. And the soundtrack complements the story pretty well. The violins and the cello really set the mixture of the dramatic and heroic tones of the story. On the other hand, the graphics are not particularly great, and while the low saturation makes sense for the game's setting, it unfortunately helps expose the flaws of the quality of the game's models. The game's cutscenes are very basic and are mostly employed to show off boss encounters or to explain the current objectives during stage transitions. For most of the game, Archeo and Styx remain in a hub until they start a mission, which then takes them to a different area. While this is fine for the most part, it also makes the game feel a bit choppy at times, especially when completing side quests. The weakest presentation aspect of Orcs and Men, however, is its edgy and awkward dialogue. Now, I'm not one of those guys that treats cursing as a sin, or thinks that he should always keep things family friendly. It's just that the cursing in this game feels very random at times. It's as if whoever wrote the dialogue felt like the only way for them to drive the point that this was supposed to be a mature and dark game was to make characters curse every few sentences.
This is not your average Warcraft kids game. This is mature. You want no curse words? Go play My Little Pony Adventure something.
The issue is that professionals have standards. You don't fucking need to fucking curse every fucking 2 fucking words to fucking drive a fucking point. fuck! The amount of cursing, your man, and your gay law insults, the slur that the orcs use, and the amount of times that Arkel says shut the fuck up like it's a word of power, much like the nature of
Now!
as if whoever hears it gets struck by lightning and has to follow the command, really gives the dialogue a Modern Warfare 2 lobby vibe. Besides the cursing, the dialogue feels robotic at times, with characters talking as if they are reading a game manual for you. Sure, the voice acting doesn't help it, but if you read the dialogue by itself, it feels like you're reading from a D&D companion. This is fine if you're just writing a lore book, but sounds really weird when used as part of the dialogue. Also, I can't help but wonder, wasn't there a better term to describe the process of forcing a person back to a conscious state? Really? Orcs and Men was a small and unpolished game, with a pretty confusing combat system that didn't do justice to its premise at all and shooed away new players. It also didn't help that the game was released during an era when some of the most popular RPGs of all time dominated the gaming market. Rough to play, visually unappealing, and relatively unknown, the game was doomed to barely get any attention, despite its somewhat interesting story, causing it to fall into the realm of forgotten games. Orcs and Men isn't a game for everyone. However, if you can get past its rough combat, it is worth giving it a try just for its story and to know where the Styx series came from. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.